Hello, hi everyone. My name is Rick Parrish and I'm from the Men of Ha'a. I want to let you know that Yopa sends his regards and he said that he felt a great sense of healing this morning. That was before I told him that we all had a moment of silence for him. So he's very appreciative and sends his aloha. Today we are going to present our presentation on equality versus equity. This is also new territory for us because we are leveraging AI. So this is a collection of our thoughts and research turned into an AI presentation with an avatar that was created from scratch.
We got one of the back row.
Within the context of social justice in modern society, what is the difference between equality and equity? The concepts of equality and equity are fundamental to discussions of social justice and have distinct meanings within this context. While both terms aim at promoting fairness, their approaches and focuses differ. Equality, definition, at its most basic, equality means sameness or uniformity. In the context of social justice, it means providing everyone with the same resources or opportunities. Application. For example, if there's a public event, ensuring that everyone has the same access to the venue would be an example of promoting equality. Limitation. Equality assumes that everyone starts from the same place and needs the same things to succeed. However, this isn't always the case. Some individuals or groups may face unique barriers or have different needs that aren't addressed when everyone is treated the same way. Equity. Definition. Equity recognizes that people have different starting points and need different resources or support to achieve similar outcomes. It's about fairness and ensuring everyone has an equal opportunity to succeed, which might require different interventions or resources for different people or groups. Application. Using the same public event example, if the venue is not naturally accessible to people with disabilities, providing ramps or other accessibility measures would be a way of promoting equity. Even though not everyone needs the ramp, it ensures that everyone has an equal opportunity to attend the event. Advantage equity can more effectively address systemic and structural barriers faced by marginalized groups. In summary, while equality focuses on providing the same resources or opportunities to everyone, equity emphasizes adjusting resources and approaches to cater to individual or group-specific needs and barriers. Both are valuable in different contexts, but understanding the distinction is crucial when discussing social justice. What is Native Hawaiian trauma? Native Hawaiian trauma refers to the historical and ongoing and intergenerational experiences of dispossession, displacement, colonization, and cultural erasure faced by the Native Hawaiian people, Kanaka Maoli. Similar to other indigenous groups worldwide, Native Hawaiians have experienced profound cultural, social, economic, and political upheavals due to external forces. Key factors contributing to Native Hawaiian trauma include land dispossession and displacement. Before Western contact, Native Hawaiians had a complex land stewardship system that connected them deeply to the Aina land. After contact, and especially after the Great Mahele land division in 1848, vast tracts of land were taken from Native control, leading to profound disconnections from ancestral lands. Overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom. In 1893, a group of American and European businessmen, aided by United States Marines, overthrew Queen Liliuokalani, the last reigning monarch of the Hawaiian Kingdom. Hawaii was then annexed to the United States in 1898, despite significant opposition from the Native Hawaiian population. Loss of language and culture. After the overthrow, the use of the Hawaiian language, Olelo Hawaii, was suppressed. It was banned from being taught in schools, leading to generations of Hawaiians who did not speak their ancestral language. This ban continued until the successful push for Hawaiian immersion schools in the 1980s. The loss of language contributed significantly to cultural erosion. Militarization and development. Strategic military interests, tourism-driven development, and research projects have led to the desecration of sacred sites and disrupted traditional lifestyles and practices. For instance, the controversy surrounding the construction of the 30-meter telescope on Mauna Kea, a sacred mountain, highlights the tensions between development and preserving cultural heritage. Health and socioeconomic disparities. Native Hawaiians today face health disparities and a range of socioeconomic challenges, including higher rates of chronic diseases, homelessness, and incarceration compared to other groups in Hawaii. These disparities are often seen as legacies of historical traumas and ongoing systemic inequalities. Cultural misappropriation. The commercialization and trivialization of Hawaiian culture, especially within the tourism industry, can exacerbate feelings of cultural loss and disrespect. The understanding of Native Hawaiian trauma is deepened by recognizing the resilience of the Kanaka Maoli. Despite the profound challenges, there has been a powerful resurgence in Hawaiian culture, language, and identity in recent decades, including the revitalization of traditional navigation, hula, and Olelo Hawaii. Efforts to address historical injustices, promote healing, and restore Native Hawaiian rights continue to be significant areas of focus within Hawaii and beyond. Given all that we have discussed, how do we address equity for Native Hawaiians within the context of social justice in today's society? Well, addressing equity for Native Hawaiians within the framework of social justice requires a multifaceted approach that acknowledges past traumas, respects cultural heritage, and provides tangible resources and opportunities for the community. Here are some strategies and considerations to foster equity. Land and resource restoration. Addressing historical land dispossession is crucial. This can include returning certain lands to Native Hawaiian stewardship, supporting traditional agricultural practices, and ensuring Hawaiians have access to and control over resources, especially in coastal areas and other culturally significant sites. Cultural revitalization. Continue and expand initiatives that aim to rejuvenate Native Hawaiian culture. This includes supporting schools that teach in Olelo Hawaii, Hawaiian language, promoting traditional arts and crafts, and encouraging the practice and teaching of traditional navigation, hula, and chants. Education. Addressing equity in education is fundamental. Ensure that the history and culture of Hawaii are accurately taught in schools. Support programs that cater specifically to Native Hawaiian students, providing them with resources and mentorship opportunities. Encourage higher education institutions to recruit and support Native Hawaiian students. Economic restoration. Economic disparities need to be addressed through job training and mentorship programs specifically for Native Hawaiians. Support for Native Hawaiian entrepreneurs and businesses. prioritizing Native Hawaiians in programs designed to address housing insecurity and homelessness. Political representation. It's vital for Native Hawaiians to have robust representation at all levels of government, from local to federal. Encourage and support Native Hawaiian-friendly candidates and ensure policies affecting the community have their input. Health and well-being. Recognize and address the health disparities faced by Native Hawaiians through culturally competent healthcare initiatives. Traditional healing practices alongside modern medicine. Community health programs focusing on prevalent issues in the Hawaiian community, such as diabetes, hypertension, and mental health. Legal and civil rights. Support efforts to legally recognize Native Hawaiian rights at state and federal levels. This can involve backing measures that grant Hawaiians more autonomy in their affairs and safeguarding their cultural heritage. Community engagement. Engage the broader community in dialogues about Native Hawaiian rights and issues. This helps in fostering understanding, dismantling misconceptions, and building allies. Addressing cultural misappropriation. Advocate against the trivialization of Hawaiian culture in the media, tourism, and businesses. Promote genuine appreciation over appropriation. Reconciliation and healing. Recognizing historical trauma and promoting efforts that facilitate healing are crucial. This can be done through public acknowledgements, reparative initiatives, and supporting platforms where Native Hawaiians can share their stories and experiences. It's important to note that true equity comes from listening to the needs and desires of the Native Hawaiian community directly. Any approach to equity should prioritize Native Hawaiian voices, insights, and leadership. Mahalo nui.
Thank you very much.
Alright, aloha kako. Mahalo Rick for such a savvy and very informational AI video presentation, and mahalo to you, Iopa, and all the Kanaka Okona for all the work that you do for Hawai'i and our Hawaii. O kaili ko'ui noa, no oahualua mai au, anoho au I ki papa. Aloha everyone, my name is Kylie. I use she, they, oya pronouns. I am born and raised on the island of Oahualua and in Kipapa, now known as Minilani. With my lineage tracing back to Moko, Keawe, and Maui. My mauna is Ka'ala, and my one hanau and Kahakai is Kumakani. Mahalo for joining us today, and this is our presentation on equity and why we should decarcerate Hawaii. So I'm here with our policy director, Carrie Ann Shirota, and my name is Kylie. Sorry, I'm nervous, guys. And I'm the field and digital organizer with the ACLU of Hawaii. Today we're going to talk about equity, and for Carrie Ann and I, we're going to be speaking from the perspective of our organizational values and as advocates for decarceration, which for those of you who don't know, decarceration is the opposite of incarceration, which means to reduce prison and jail populations. So here's a shortened outline of what we're going to be talking about today, and a quick but loving content warning that the following presentation will contain and discuss several sensitive topics that might trigger some folks. And I know that the topic of re-entry, decarceration, and incarceration are already triggering in and of itself. So please feel free to take a moment to step outside, to breathe, and to feel all the emotions that you need to feel. So mahalo, and without further ado, let's just jump right into it. So first, who we are. The American Civil Liberties Union, or the ACLU of Hawaii, upholds and defends the civil liberties and rights of the U.S. Constitution, Hawaii State Constitution, and other state and federal laws and policies. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan government watchdog organization that has been functioning in Hawaii since 1965. We're a part of a larger national ACLU organization that is best known for their work defending rights like free speech, queer rights, workers' rights, protest rights, rights during police encounters, and so much more. and much of our work here in Hawaii also involves criminal legal reforms, including advocating for policies that support Hawai'i and re-entry work here in Hawaii. So now, why are we here? I'm a part of the field department within our affiliate, and what we help to get what our communities want by organizing on the ground, being in community, building relationship and interacting with those that we best serve, and help to uplift the stories of and empower impacted folks, and help to mobilize people to take action and use their collective people power. Carrie Ann is a part of our policy department, and she works more closely with lawmakers and policymakers, and all of our departments, including our legal department and others, work together so that we can collectively achieve our goals to reach our communities in both narrow and broad ways. And Carrie Ann will later be going into more depth later about what bills and laws we work to support re-entry, equity, and so on. So one of our main primary legislative and campaign priorities is called Smart Justice, where we work to achieve two deeply intersectional goals. One is to reduce the incarcerated population by 50%, and the second is to challenge racism in the criminal legal system and reduce racial disparities. As I'm about to review, and as many of us here know, our carceral facilities are extremely overcrowded. Excuse me, while I definitely feel the things that I'm talking about. Our carceral facilities are extremely overcrowded, treat our loved ones and community members inhumanely, and are primarily made up of those who are already, who are already oppressed and marginalized most in our communities, particularly Native Hawaiians, in what's supposedly called the Aloha State. Native Hawaiians are already further dispossessed and intentionally separated from our land and our culture while incarcerated in Hawai'i. There are mothers, pregnant folks, and prior caretakers of families who are further separated from their loved ones and communities. There are houseless, mentally ill, low income, disabled, queer, Native Hawaiian, Micronesian, Pacific Islander, Filipino, Black, and other groups who are already forgotten, stereotyped, and harmed on a daily basis by existing in a place that only, sorry, half of my contact fell out just now. So I am struggling a little bit to read.
Take a breath, just like what you told us to take a moment. Just take a moment. Blow your nose, take a breath, whatever you need to do. Thank you.
Smart Justice recognizes that our current tough on crime policies are not working and do not actually keep us safe and maintain public safety. Smart Justice advocates for safer communities, fewer people behind bars, and fewer taxpayer dollars wasted on unnecessary incarceration. Our current carceral state is unacceptable. In Hawaii, according to the most recent data from the Department of Public Safety, just from last week, August 14, 2023, there are 3,108 people incarcerated in Hawaii. And on the continent, in Arizona, there are 872 people incarcerated under Hawaii's jurisdiction for a total of 3,908 people. That's almost 4,000 of Hawaii's community members who could be better held accountable in community, in culturally grounded and culturally appropriate practices and support groups, and whose trauma that led them to be criminalized is only further exacerbated by the trauma of incarceration. To the left side of the screen, we can see a pie chart that kind of illustrates this aggregated data from DPS. And in blue, we can see reading sentenced, etc. We can see that 1,220 people are incarcerated for sentenced felonies, misdemeanors, and felony probations. In the purple, reading pretrial, we can see that 1,077 people are being incarcerated pretrial, which literally means that they are legally innocent and have not seen a trial and have not been convicted yet of a crime. In the dark yellow-orange section, reading probation revoked, we can see 496 people are incarcerated for a technical violation of their probation, and in the dark red burgundy section, reading parole revoked, we can see 315 people are incarcerated for a technical violation of their parole. According to this most recent data, the majority of our carceral populations is made up of sentenced and pretrial individuals. This means that we desperately need decriminalization, defelonization, and pretrial reforms, or bail reforms, so that we can effectively decarcerate and reduce our carceral populations and bring them back outside of vicious cycles of poverty and criminalization and incarceration. But who are the people and the faces behind these numbers, and why are they there? Mass incarceration in Hawaii primarily impacts and traumatizes Kanaka Oiwi, or Native Hawaiians, and has for generations, and only began with the unwanted Western and American influences forcing their way onto our land and introducing capital punishment. In pre-colonial Hawaii, Ikawakahiko, Kanaka Oiwi recognized that everyone is born with an inherent humanity and worthiness. Doing a bad thing doesn't make you a bad person or worthy of punishment or worthy of incarceration. Alternatives to punishment, like pu'uhonua, or places of refuge, were available to those who broke kapu, sacredness, or kanawai laws. This was further affirmed and codified with the first written law of the Hawaiian Kingdom, Ikanawai Mamalohoe, which basically states that everybody deserves to live safely and free of harm. Yet this all changed when Western forms of punishment were introduced in the 19th century, following the unwanted arrival of Westerners and colonization. One prominent example of this violent shift in society to capital punishment is the incarceration of our Quinili Ukulele, after the illegal overthrow of the Hawaiian Kingdom, and whose grandfather, Chief Kamanava, was actually the first instance of capital punishment in Hawaii, as he was hanged. Quinili'u's incarceration and the state killing of her grandfather speak to the ways in which carceral practices continue to disempower our lahui, our nation today, through the continuing overrepresentation and criminalization of Kanaka. As I previously stated, in pre-colonial times, while punishment was the standard for breaking kapu, or kanawai, one could escape these punishments by being saved by an ali'i or escaping to pu'uhonua, again a place of refuge. But pu'uhonua were not only physical places, but encompassed between the relationship offered between Kanaka, our pilina. We had protection in our relationships. One wahine, Ka'ahumanu, or Queen Ka'ahumanu, the favorite wahine of King Kamehameha I, served herself, or was a pu'uhonua herself as a manu wahine, alongside her lands and her aina. Ka'ahumanu served as an intervening force of the punitory Hawaiian Kingdom systems. While not comparable to contemporary incarceration, pre-colonial Hawaii's punishment and retribution for breaking kapu and kanawai still recognized the inherent humanity and worthiness of all Kanaka and could hold people accountable without the violence of separating them from their genealogical aina and their kaiolu, or communities. Now I'm going to talk about numbers to hopefully help to show the extent of harm done by incarceration. And please note that many of these numbers are undercounted because of colonial and narrow definitions of Kanaka Mo'oli, indigeneity, and blood quantum. Kanaka Mo'oli are drastically overrepresented in Hawaii's carceral facilities, making up about 40% of the incarcerated population across the board. And as we can see from this chart that I borrowed from Office of Hawaiian Affairs' 2010 report on Native Hawaiians and carceral systems, we can see here that Kanaka, again, greatly overrepresented on every single level. And to echo and quote the findings of OHA's report in 2010, Kanaka are more likely to get a prison sentence than all other groups. Kanaka receive longer prison sentences than most other racial or ethnic groups. Kanaka are sentenced to longer probation terms than most other racial or ethnic groups. Kanaka make up the highest percentage of those incarcerated in out-of-state facilities. Kanaka do not use drugs at drastically different rates than other racial or ethnic groups, but are still going to prison for more drug offenses more than other racial or ethnic groups. Kanaka already suffer the generational traumas from Western colonization in other areas like houselessness, poverty, chronic illness and disability, land dispossession, sex trafficking, and so much more. To be criminalized for circumstances created by colonization that are out of any individual's control is unacceptable, but we must also look beyond a racialized lens to understand the full scope of harm being inflicted upon our people. Wahine, our Native Hawaiian women, suffer the blunt end of incarceration in Hawaii. We only make up 19.8% of the general population, but 43.7% of the incarcerated women population in Hawaii. This is more so than Kane, our Native Hawaiian men, who are overrepresented by 36.2% in the incarcerated male population. Wahine also have an incarceration rate double that of all other women in Hawaii, as we can see from this chart in the blue compared to total women incarcerated in the light green, or maybe it looks like blue on this screen. Hawaii has the largest proportion of its women in prison, with Native Hawaiian women making up the majority of incarcerated women. And when our wahine are suffering from further gender-based assault inside, harassment, violence, and trauma, we know that this is an urgent problem. Here are more wahine disparities that contextualize these high rates of incarceration. And as we can see from these little bubbles on the screen, 17.8% of Native Hawaiian women are victims of intimate partner violence, or IPV, and 24.1% have seriously considered suicide. Native Hawaiian women are 1.5 times more likely to experience sexual assault, and Native Hawaiian women make up 2/3 of trafficked women and girls in Hawaii. Due to a lack of access to healthcare, wahine are also drastically more likely to get breast cancer than their non-Hawaiian peers. On a broader scale of all women incarcerated, 54% of incarcerated women have never graduated from high school, and most incarcerated women in Hawaii are reportedly introduced to drug use through their intimate partners upon whom they are financially dependent and often abused by. This pathway of trauma and abuse often leads to committing low-level criminalized offenses, such as offenses related to juvenile status, various property-related crimes, and drug-related crimes. These stark disparities between Native women and non-Native women and Native women and Native Hawaiian men prove that the overrepresentation of wahine in prisons and jails is not because of their individual actions, rather our system's intentional failures to provide our people with the care that they need. And these disparities go deeper than false and colonial ideas of gender binaries. Mahu, or queer, trans, and LGBTQIA+ folks, to roughly translate the term into English, are incarcerated and caged in facilities that further harm them by misgendering them, in facilities that they do not belong to. Excuse me. While there is no publicly available data on who and how many Mahu are incarcerated in carceral facilities here or on the continent, we hope to support the efforts of those who can and will collect that data. This misgendering on a daily basis is a violence in and of itself, on top of the violence of being incarcerated on top of sexual and gendered assault, abuse, and harassment, and other harms while incarcerated. These harms against our mahui, who are so integral to our communities and histories, must be actively refused as a reality. We need these numbers and this aggregated data so that we can better serve and uplift those who are far too often forgotten and left behind. All of these disparities, primarily amongst Kanaka, are deeply intersectional and deeply interrelated with issues like trafficking, intimate partner violence, sexual violence, the poison waters at Kapukaki or Red Hill, houselessness, poverty, and more. All of these issues stem from the same generational issue of colonization, which still functions today to maintain these disparities and finances to uphold systems of oppression against Kanaka. In order to effectively address these issues, we must return to our histories and ways of being, rooted in reciprocity that have helped us strive for thousands of years before the arrival of Westerners. Incarceration does not address these root causes of colonization and the reason behind criminalized activities, and instead only perpetuates cycles of harm that fuels the criminal legal system and criminalization that capitalize off of our people's suffering. Incarceration destabilizes families and intentionally exploited and under-resourced communities, increases the likelihood of recidivism by reinforcing cycles of poverty, and wastes millions of taxpayer dollars and perpetuates colonial systems of harm. As our ancestors knew and practiced ikawaka'iko, we need alternatives to mass incarceration that are culturally appropriate, equitable, and rooted in indigenous beliefs around Hawai'i and return to community that actually ameliorate these stark disparities and address the root causes of incarceration and criminalization. We urgently need smart justice and indigenized solutions to mass incarceration and re-entry to achieve equity in Hawai'i and beyond. Mahalo for listening, and now I'm going to pass it over to Carrie Ann to further share her mana'o on decarceration strategies.
Aloha kakou, everyone. Difficult to go after Kylie if I don't keep back tears as well. I'm sorry, I have to keep my mask on. There's some family members out of you compromised, but I just want to share a little bit of background before I go directly into strategies and solutions, because they exist and we can do it. I'm from the island of Maui. Both sides of my family immigrants 4 generations ago, but I consider Maui and Hawaii my home. So you can see here today we're in pink to represent the island of Maui. I know all of our thoughts and prayers are with them. It's a difficult time for all of us. And so mahalo nui for your prayers and your thoughts. This work is deeply personal to me too, because I grew up, like many of us here, even if I'm not Kanaka Maoli, married through marriage, Hawaiian members of my family. I grew up in the countryside of Maui, so I grew up around pastures and cows and animals. And I noticed from a young age that it's here that there are several members of my family who kept cycling in and out of the carceral system. And they weren't all Native Hawaiian, but most of them were. My male cousins, my uncles. And I always was curious, well, why is that? Why am I growing up to see some members of my family more likely to be criminalized than others? And to add to that, when I was 6 years old, my uncle, my mom's brother, who we lived with for a while, he was murdered. So I was 6 years old, my uncle was murdered. Till this day, no one was ever arrested, no one ever convicted. We still don't really know. But I am very fortunate because I grew up in a family of strength and of faith. And I remember being 6 years old and my grandmother had said, they were talking in the kitchen as families do, and I overheard, and someone was saying to my grandmother, her name was Virginia, they'd say, Virgie, well, someday they're gonna catch the person, whoever it is, they should get the death penalty. Let them suffer. And my grandmother, who was a woman of faith, said she didn't want that, because whoever killed my uncle which was one of her babies. And this was after losing 2 other children prior to that, to cancer, another baby that was stillborn. She said, whoever did this was somebody's child. And she would never want that family to suffer the way that she did. And she also said, that would never bring my uncle back. And so I feel like I was introduced to the criminal legal system with this mindset that when people harm others, we need to punish them. We need to hurt them. We need to take for them an eye for an eye. But as Gandhi said, an eye for an eye would make the whole world go blind. And there are other ways, indigenous ways, in Hawaii throughout the world. And what can we learn? What have we been doing right? And how can we build upon those and sustain it? So we want to take you on this journey of decarceration in other places, but also what's being done here in Hawaii. So just some numbers, and I know some of you might be tired of hearing data, but context, right? The United States incarcerates more people than any other country in the whole world. Any given day, 1.9 million. And mind you, this is a slightly lower than what it used to be. We've incarcerated more people before, which is mind-boggling. We talk about equal protection, we talk about democracy and freedom, and yet we lock up more people than any other nation in the world, far outstripping other countries, from China to Russia to Cuba to El Salvador. And we want to look at it, bring it down a little bit. The United States, what's the carceral landscape in a few other states? What are the numbers? So if we see here, the incarceration rate, sorry, I didn't put it up on the screen. Incarceration rate is how many people per 100,000 that a country or state locks up. The United States has the highest number. We have 664 people locked up for every 100,000 people, 664. When we say that, we're talking about individuals, but we're really talking about an individual who's oftentimes connected to their family and communities. And we know certain groups of people are more likely to be impacted. We also know that the communities most affected are significantly under-resourced. If those communities had gotten the care or the help that they needed, there wouldn't be as many people incarcerated. When we look at Louisiana, Louisiana incarcerates 1,094 people per 100,000. So they're at the top, unfortunately. #1 mass incarcerator in the United States. So where's the tail end? What state has the least amount of people incarcerated per 100,000? It is Massachusetts. They incarcerate 275 people per 100,000. Keeping in mind, though, that this is still much higher than almost all other places in the world. So where does Hawaii fit in? Anybody want to take a guess what is our incarceration rate? Blank number of people per 100,000?
800.
Someone said 800, 600. We're at 439. We actually had it higher before, but we've decreased. But again, 439 people per 100,000. Again, that translates to a number of us. If I would ask how many of you are impacted, have a loved one incarcerated, so many of us would put up our hands, right? So it touches us in so many ways. It's personal. Again, this is in context. You can see Hawaii here. Unfortunately, this graphic only shows it in comparison to NATO countries, but there's a larger graphic, which I couldn't put on the screen, that shows Hawaii and other states in the whole context of like all these world countries, and you can see it, right? When we talk about we've hired Russia, El Salvador, Cuba, other places. Iran. Okay, so remember Kylie shared another pie earlier, but we want to just highlight a few things. So this right here, this chart is from 2023. So there have been discrepancies. We've heard people put out some different numbers. Kylie talked about people incarcerated under a state system. This here shows the whole pie. So it shows 4,000 people at this point in time, so a snapshot, in our state jails, prisons, and where we export our people to private, for-profit prisons right on the continent. Currently, they're quote confined in Arizona, but at one time we literally exported our people to Minnesota, Tennessee, Texas, all over, right? The women were in Kentucky. Youth, over time, that population has gotten smaller and smaller, and that's a good thing, it's something we want to touch upon. Involuntary commitment means somebody has been adjudicated by the court and to determine that they don't have capacity, so they may be placed in hospital. And then you can see federal prisons here. So this was in 2023. So this is already something that we can work on. We want to keep decarcerating. But this isn't the only thing we need to work on decarceration. We want to show the next slide, which also adds in the population of probation and parole. And why is this so important? Because this really shows the big picture. While we would agree that it's better for people to be in the community getting the services they need, so even if they're under correctional supervision, probation, or parole, but that system also needs significant reform. Because on any given day, people have all these supervision requirements and rules, from if you miss meeting with your probation or parole officer, if you test, quote, dirty for a drug test, which if you have addiction issues, oftentimes there will be a relapse. You will still need help and support. But yet, rather than helping people in the community and give them more support, sometimes they are reincarcerated for, quote, technical violations. It's not because they're arrested for a new crime, but it's because they're, quote, violating the rules. And so this then, that 17,000 in probation, 1,300 in parole, can easily go from any given day, violation, make our prison population expand and contract. And these are all things that are within our control in terms of the policies we choose to implement. But the good news is that we can reverse these policies and implementation. So just real quick, I just wanted to show, Kylie showed us some of the numbers. These literally, the numbers of racial disparities have existed for literally decades. There are doctors who've studied this, but this is just to show in context. You can see comparison of visual, right? Between different demographic groups in Hawaii. You can see Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders far outstripping others. This one here, we also want to make clear, when we talk about equity, we definitely want to reduce the whole carceral population, but we also want to reduce racial disparities. Now, we're not just suggesting that the end result is to then flatten the rate, meaning X number of Native Hawaiians. So as long as they're the same number in our population and the same as well, we're all good. We're saying, we're saying we need to do enough to decarcerate and have people in the community and with their families. So we just want to clarify, that is our goal. So what are some lessons we can learn? There are criminal justice, criminal legal advocates here in Hawaii, the continent, the world. And we don't have time to cover all of them. We could have had a whole day conference on it. But we want to highlight some things. One of the key takeaways, if I can just, I'll say it twice, is criminal justice policies, not crime rates, drive our jail and prison population. Again, it's not crime rates, it is our policies. So we're going to talk about some illustrations of this. And the second principle I want you to leave with is that it is possible to decarcerate without compromising public safety. In fact, there are studies that show when you decarcerate, you actually enhance community safety, which is the total opposite of what we are fed anytime you open the newspaper, look at social media, look at the 6 o'clock news. Now, crime sensationalism sells, but that is the myth, and that has us fearful, so we feel like we have to, quote, be tough on crime, when the opposite policies show that you can hold people to be accountable, and that's what helps to build safe, healthy, just, thriving communities, not just incarcerating people and locking them up. So we want to give you some examples. Kai's going to help me with time because I have a tendency to keep talking and going over, so I'll do that. Okay, so here are some examples. New Jersey, in 11 years, by a whole host of different, quote, decarceration strategies. And when I say strategies, we're looking at the entire system. Sometimes people focus on the tail end. Let's put money into helping people reintegrate or reintegration. Yes, that's important, but we have to start from before people ever get into the system. We need to divert people from the system. And that starts in our communities, it starts in our families, it starts in the school system, where we know that there's a pipeline that policies drive Keiki, the most vulnerable, into our carceral system, right? And it just keeps multiplying along the way. But going back to New Jersey, in 11 years, they decarcerated by 26% of their population. And that just sounds like numbers, right? But that decreased it by almost, you can see 8,200 people. 8,000 something people less in our jail, in their jails and prisons, which meant the impact on their family, the impact on the community. Not to mention how much money the state would be saving, because we know that incarceration is the most expensive and least effective response to crime. Most effective, least expensive. Does that sound like good public use of dollars? No, right? We want to flip the script. Now, some people say, well, if they did that, crime rates must have shot up. Again, that's a criminal justice myth that we've been fed far too often, and we need to push back. During that time, violent crime nationally decreased. But New Jersey, that intentionally decarcerated, their violent crime fell by 30%, more than the national rate, which goes to show again that you can decarcerate without compromising public safety. And simultaneously, if I could just add, their property crime rate also decreased by 31% when they decarcerated. So violent crime went down, property crime went down, and less people were incarcerated. Next state. But of course, we don't get this on the news, right, to tell us like what is possible. California. Now California, because of their large carceral system, there was actually a lawsuit that was filed challenging the unconstitutional conditions of confinement, which under the US Constitution, there's a certain standard. If you're gonna, quote, incarcerate people, the state has a legal duty, not to mention the moral duty, to help people to rehabilitate, right? That's assuming the best intentions of the system. But there were allegations that their healthcare system fell below the minimum standard. There was litigation, and through all of that, they worked on this policy, and they call it realignment. So they realigned their policies, and in 6 years, they decarcerated by 23% for almost 40,000 people. So imagine, 6 years, they decarcerated by nearly 40,000 people, and right now we have about 4,000 to 5,000 people in our system. If New Jersey and California can do it, right, we can do it too. Let me give you another example, and just highlight crime rates, violent crime rates dropped, property crime dropped while decarceration. One more state, New York. We always think too late, New York being tough on crime, but they had a concerted effort to stop or decrease incarceration, especially for people convicted of drug offenses. From the ACLU perspective, if a person is using a drug, that's a personal choice. And yet we continue to criminalize people for using drugs. Oftentimes people use it, there's trauma and there's all these reasons. But again, through drugs, decriminalization, other strategies, in 11 years they decreased their population by 26%, which translates to almost 20,000 people. Violent crime decreased by 31%, and property crime fell by 29%. So you see, this is like a win-win-win strategy, but we have to have the collective will to do it. So that brings us to Hawaii, and I just want to acknowledge him and others in the room. Here with us is Martha Turney. She was at the Oversight Commission, but she also worked with Hawaii Correctional Facility. Tamika Patterson in the back, Oversight Commission, head of Hawaii OYS, right, Office of Youth Services. So they could give the presentation on this section. Hawaii years ago, and I don't know what the numbers were like pre-2000, but there were a number of youth locked up in our correctional system, right? This is where the ACO contributed to this effort amongst many, many people in the community and groups. But there were reports of rampant abuse, that children who already needed our most care, nurturing, love, and support were being subjected to harassment, and especially youth who identified as LGBTQ. I mean, just on top of everything they're experiencing trauma, they were being treated, mistreated, abused by staff members. I'm not saying all. The ACLU miraculously got in at the time, and they wrote a report detailing all of this abuse after talking to the youth and hearing their stories. The ACLU shared that report with the Department of Justice. Department of Justice then did their own investigation and reaffirmed what the ACLU had said. That led to essentially a highlight on the problem. ACLU filed a lawsuit. Now, we try to do things where we mediate, negotiate, but there's times that you have to use the hammer of the law to effectuate and push for changes, and this was one of them. The ACLU eventually settled that suit on behalf of our 3 clients, but beyond that, this led to other efforts to say, we need to decrease the number of youth there and change conditions and policies. And some of the people in this room were a part of that. There was a working group that was created. Kavika Patterson was appointed. So over the years, there has been a significant decrease in the number of keiki in the youth facility. And they have converted it, not even calling it Hawai'i Youth Correctional Facility. They've renamed it, the power of names. You know that Dr. Jamie Miller said. It's Kawailoa Youth and Family Center, which is a traditional name and talks about the life-giving waters. There's a whole shift from a punitive to a therapeutic model. And as of last year, this made national news. We had 0 girls incarcerated, 0. And there's a small number of males incarcerated at the youth level. So if we can do this for the youth system, we can do it for our adult system. It is possible. We have to believe it, and we need to quote Les Hui, and we're doing it also to quote Tony B said this morning, and we can. So, how does Hawaii fare? Remember I said that we've taken some steps? And I'm sorry, I actually meant to put 2 different pie charts side by side, but just didn't get it there. This slide right here is actually from 2016. I think I showed one earlier as 2023.
Yeah.
So in the past 6 years, we actually have decarcerated our adult system by about 6,000 people, which is significant, which is important. How did we do it? There's a number of different strategies that have been employed, but we cannot be satisfied with this. This is not enough. We need to keep going, and Smart Justice goal is to get it to 50% reduction, but why stop there? So what are the strategies that we, as collective agents of change, as justice warriors, what can we do together? Some of the things I'm gonna just briefly touch upon, some of these things a little more detail, and you can always reach out to us and please be partners with us in helping to advance this. And I just wanna do a time check. 2:30, I think we're trying to go to 2:40 and leave 20 minutes for Q&A so we can hear from all of you. So it goes without saying, address poverty and racism in our communities. That's where we need to reinvest all this money that's being used for corrections, for prisons, to incarcerate, to move it, reallocate, put it where it belongs in the front. There's like studies that show that an investment in keiki's early childhood education helps to increase the likelihood that they will not end up in jail or prison. The same is true of literacy. If a child has a higher literacy rating when they're maybe like 3rd or 4th grade, less likelihood that they will end up in our jail and prison system. Housing, it's been a focus, right? We know that if people do not feel safe and have a safe, loving home environment, your zip code actually impacts life opportunities. So someone who's living in Kahala, on Oahu, or someone who's living in Kaanapali, certain parts, or someone who's living in other areas of communities, there's different opportunities just from where you are living, or what you might have access to. We need to, again, divert funding. We want to decriminalize poverty. You've probably heard a lot, ACLU's been in the news about some of our lawsuits that we filed, helping to end the unconstitutional houseless sweeps, which we see just keeps moving people, but it doesn't address the root problem. And drug use, we talked about that. There is a cannabis legalization bill that's moving. There's a whole host of people who are incarcerated, especially Kanaka Maoli, for using a plant, and that other people in other states where it's now legalized are making a profit. And yet people are still incarcerated for using a plant that other people are now making a profit from. Community-based healthcare. It goes without saying, we need more investment in community-based resources, from healthcare to counseling, to mediation, to drop-in services for youth, for people who are dealing with housing instability. If they just had a place to go to use the restroom, to just be safe at night. Just a total shift in the way we think. We need to invest in alternative crisis response teams. Some of you may have heard about a model in Oregon called Cahoots. There's also another type of program in Oregon, not Oregon, in Oakland called Macro. This idea is that we rely far too much on police to address so many of our social problems. They're just not trained to do it. And so what we need to do is to give funding and continue to train the people who can respond to behavioral crisis, who can help people in their most vulnerable moments. And instead of giving them, handcuffs, we actually give them housing. We give them counseling, not handcuffs. That can be done. That often is done. Alternative crisis response teams typically happens at the county level, so that's Hawaii County, Maui, Kauai. Diversion programs. The idea that let's not try to, quote, help and rehabilitate people when they're already in the system and further traumatized. Let's divert them so that they're not even in there, right? Remove them so that they don't get into the system, help people. It's the most effective, cost-effective mechanism. We do want to highlight pretrial fairness. This is known as bail reform. We know right now that we have a system that the size of your wallet essentially dictates whether you will be locked up and detained, versus if you have lots of money, you could be charged with the exact same crime and you get a get out of jail free pass because you have money. And I think we need to look at the reality. We're here on Hawaii Island, and HCC, Hawaii Hilo Jail, is the most overcrowded compared to any other jail, I think at this moment in time. In the past, it's been Maui, it's kind of moved. So why are we spending so much money, the $250 a day to incarcerate, for a number of people who have not even been convicted? It's just an allegation. And they are being warehoused and not getting the services they need, and that's a drain for education, housing, all the other things. I say this all the time. Is there a wait list to get into jail or prison? No wait list, right? To get into jail or prison, the most expensive, least effective response to crime. But how many people have tried to get into drug treatment programs or some kind of employment program and they can't get in? You know why? Because it's full, or because they don't have the resources. But you know what? We'll put you on a wait list. That wait list can mean the difference between somebody going into the system or dying, or going into the system and being subjected to violence or death or suicide. And so again, it's not that we don't have the money, we need to have the will and then divert the resources. Then I have about 2 minutes. Okay, so I think I have like 2 more slides. Decarceration strategies, sentencing reform. There's this saying that we put too many people behind bars for too long. So one is to decrease the number of people who are going, be entering the prison system, jail system, but long sentences. Do we really need somebody to be serving time 5 years, 10, 20, 40 years? There are people who literally have died in our prisons who are like 80-something years old. If you were to look at the Oversight Commission's reports for the last year or so, a higher percentage of the people who have died inside of our jails and prison are kupuna, they're elderly. I even heard of a man who they were trying to work on compassionate release. He was in diapers. And we as a community, no matter what he did, there's a place for compassion and there's a better way to treat her than to die in a place like this. Rehabilitation programs, I think so many of you are experts, you guys are working to do this work. I want to highlight clemency. We have a redemption clemency program. The idea is that, yes, all of us can contribute to decarceration, but the governor plays a role. The governor has the authority under our constitution, state constitution, and so does the president, to quote, issue pardons, commutations. A commutation means a shortening of a sentence. A reprieve means to maybe place their sentence on hold so that they don't necessarily have to go in and start their sentence. There are some other governors who have pardoned and or commuted people's sentences. Governor Josh Green should be our audience. We want you to join us and ask him to embrace clemency and shorten people's sentence, and especially to get vulnerable people, especially kupuna, out of our jails and prisons and into the community. Compassionate release, there is a process for that, but we need to expand the number of people who have terminal illness or who have other major comorbidities, help them to come into the community to get the services they need. Restorative justice, there are pockets of programs here and there, but there are some other states and some other programs like Impact Justice, which I really admire in Oakland, California. This idea is that in Impact Justice, they use restorative justice as a diversion so that people can opt to participate in restorative justice rather than continue down the continuum of the criminal legal system, and they focus on youth. So imagine if some youth who need an impulsive decision had an opportunity for restorative justice and to be diverted from this very system. Okay, we're 2:40, I think I can do this maybe 2 more minutes. Probation and parole. Remember we talked about how large our system is when you add in probation and parole? Did you know that Hawaii has the longest rates of probation in the United States? We have it longer than any other state. The average is 6 years. Who needs to be on probation for 6 years? Nobody. The longer there's someone under supervision, the greater likelihood they will, quote, be violated and back into the system. So there's all these areas that we can decarcerate. And the probation, which falls under judiciary, plays an important role. And on the back end, parole reform. I looked at the last 3 years of reports for parole for probably 5 years. I think it was 97% to 100% of all people revoked for parole who were reincarcerated for technical violations and not criminal charges. And then we want to talk about pu'u honua. There actually was a resolution passed some years ago. Wahana Ukitele, who's from Hawai'i Island, they've been talking about the importance of creating pu'u honua. You know what? It was wonderful that it passed, but the work is the implementation. They have not gotten any resources, nor have they gotten the help to implement. So this is our challenge collectively. Reintegration program. I used to work for MEO Best Reintegration on Maui. Host of services, housing, employment, family reunification, cultural programs, hula inside the jails and prisons. And when people came out, so many people joined the halau, and that was now their extended family. There's just so much we can do. And last, I want to highlight clean slate, which is the idea is that once you serve your debt to society, you should not be continually punished. So even when people have served their time, they try to apply for a job. Background check, can't get a job. Apply for housing. Background check, you're not eligible because we think you're dangerous. People in the United States and Hawaii have a life sentence once you get in the system. Clean slate is the idea that after a period of time, there will be a system using technology to automatically expunge those records so you really can have a second chance, which impacts your ability to take care of yourselves, your family, community. And I think we're just gonna jump over that. We will share additional information about our different campaigns. And last, there still is a push to build more jails in Hawaii. Right now, the focus is on OCCC. Before it was on Maui. We've literally spent millions of dollars on planning and consultants. All of that money could be reinvested into all of our programs here in the community. So don't believe the hype. Please join us to help stop this and invest in alternatives. And last, there's a quote from Nelson Mandela, one of my heroes. He says, "It always seems impossible until it's done." And it's so true because all of you are going to continue to be agents of change. And when we look back years from now, we might not even be here. But what we start now is going to be the foundation to diverting keiki, next generations from entering the system. And so I want to invite all of you, please join us in the true movement for equity and decarceration. Mahalo. 16 minutes for Q&A, so we want to open up in a break. It's always this thing like, who's going to ask the first question? But feel free. It can even just be more like a comment, an observation that you have.
I'll share
feedback, please.
So I know that, I work in housing, and so it's it's so hard when you talk about removing the checkbox from, why can't we do that with housing, right? Housing applications. And I worked in a housing where I made a decision that this is going to be a second chance property. I'm going to check your ikokua, but you need a house, and it changed lives at where I was at. And so I want to see how we can do that. And then the other problem that I noticed is we had people who said they had expungements. They had actual documents from court saying that. You go to their records, and it's still there, years and years, and we're waiting, and we're helping them, they're in our housing program, trying to help them write letters like, what happened to the expungement you promised me 5 years ago? And so I find that that's also been a problem. So I would like to see that really, they say they're doing it, but I don't see it sometimes on people's records that it's done.
What is your
Tony Sanders.
So mahalo. I think two things, maybe You're just throwing up brainstorms, right? That's why we're here. We currently, Hawaii actually was the first state to include arrest and court record as a protected basis in our fair employment laws. But we don't have that protection in our state laws for housing. Now we could, again, if there's collective will and advocacy to do that. So there is something, there are some efforts in other states is to add arrest and court record to housing and to prohibit it. Now there might still be some limitations to it, but it's better than no protections at all. But I will say that currently, if somebody can show that the arrest and court record has a disparate impact, particularly let's say by race, HUD, which is the federal government, and HRC could investigate and potentially determine that there's a violation because it's disproportionately impacting Native Hawaiians, and on the continent it'd be African Americans and Latinos. And then the second question was expungement, yes. So you're right, the system is flawed. Some people, very small portion, qualify for expungement, but there's all these affirmative steps you have to do to have an expungement. So sometimes people do part of it, and then either the system, the Attorney General's office, there's a database, but there's also a judiciary database, and these systems are not aligned. So sometimes someone may have gotten a paper and may have removed it from one system but not the other, and then when they run the background checks, different things are pulled up. Now there's also sometimes even just errors. Formerly had a client who had a situation where he looked at his court record, it was not him, it was another person who used his name, and it came up. So there are ways that we need to improve the system, and this clean state, literally there's a movement, a number of states. The benefit to that is they will take like the data techie experts, they create a system so after let's say 5 years or 10 years, it literally removes it from a system. I think it's more of a foolproof system than what we have right now. But I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'd like to see that change, because even the people we're working with, they're not highly educated. I have a letter, why is it, they don't know how to access it after you've been out for 5 years,
And it's intimidating. And for some people to actually even get an expungement, you have to pay money. You have to go through all these hoops. So the idea about clean slate is that you don't have to go through these hoops, it will automatically occur.
Right.
And that means more people can have real opportunities, right, for second chances.
Keep getting the text messages from you guys.
Yeah, great. Other questions, comments, feedback, insights? Yes.
Yeah, and I'm wondering where or how the American with Disabilities Act falls into place with a lot of the stuff that goes on with our justice involved population. I think about it from the perspective of like, from addiction, right? So we have the stigma, of course, it's like, you're a drug addict, you're a criminal, but addiction is also in the DSM-5, right? Which makes it a brain disease, right? Just like all the other brain diseases that are in there. I think of those that are neurodivergent, those that are diagnosed, autistic, ADHD, OCD, all of these pieces. And yet what I see here in the state of Hawaii, specifically those with the co-occurring addiction and some neurodivergent pieces, that they're not being treated when they're in, like we always, like I see the ACLU doing a lot of work and a lot of elected officials here also who are trying to push the cause. So much of it though comes up around medication for mental illness, and what they think when they say mental illness is anxiety, depression, psychosis. I'm always politely reminding people that psychosis is not a diagnosis, it's a symptom of a diagnosis, right? That's what we want to make sure everyone has their medication for. But if someone is autistic and has some sensory issues, right, they require the supports just as much. ASD is still a diagnosis, whether it's level 1, 2, or 3, and yet those aren't being provided in the system and in a lot of the outside reentry programs like the drug rehabs or those types of facilities. That's not offered either, and yet there doesn't seem to be anything that anyone's doing about that. And that's not me attacking the ACL. This was my favorite presentation of the day. Like, I want the slide, I want you to come into like everywhere I ever go talk. I want to bring both of you like, like
Okay.
I don't mean it that way at all. I just want to know like, how do we get around that piece of it? Like, oh, we're treating the healthcare piece because here's your lithium. But I also need headphones because I'm autistic and have sensory issues, and it's hard for me to be in that space. Why is one allowed and able to be forced under a law and the other isn't?
Right. And that's a larger issue, right? There's so much stigma to certain types of quote disabilities. There's often so much empathy for someone who has a physical disability, something we can see, but for quote invisible disabilities. You asked specifically about the ADA. It definitely has a role. I can tell you that There's some other places probably are pushing those issues, but under ADA, even government-funded services, they're supposed to provide certain things to people, accommodations, right? Is that happening? No. I think the challenge is that we have so many battles that we're fighting on so many levels, but I would love to see more effort because we didn't get it. There's so many different groups, right? But another group is disability. We know that people who have disabilities are so much more likely to be arrested, to be in the system, not only to be incarcerated, but then to be victimized in the carceral system. And so I think it's a conversation we need to continue to have. We do have some people in the room with the greater expertise who can talk about what's being done in terms of ADA, but I do know that there has been an effort, at least collectively, to talk about ADA access in terms of physical. But again, it cannot just be physical access. We're talking about other services that are needed. Yes, sir. I'm sorry.
It occurs to me that ACLU is the spearhead of change in society for social justice on many different levels. And I was struck by the presentation prior to lunch where they were talking about, well, you have to be on the street for 1 year and that's the way it is, and that's stuff, so you gotta work around that. Whereas I'm thinking, if the policy is a barrier, then you change the policy. And so,
Amen.
so you have been at the forefront of policy changes. So on a broader level, what do we need to do as community-based organizations to support you to make these policy changes that are acting as barriers to real change?
That's a great question. It takes literally all of us. Because I can tell you this, when we advocate at the Capitol with some lawmakers, what we say our message resonates with them. But there are other lawmakers, quite frankly, who hear ACLU and it's just like, oh, those, radical people, and just sort of, they just kind of tune us out. Literally, because we need to hold all lawmakers accountable. They are supposed to represent us and all of us, including those who are most marginalized, right? And so how you can work together. Before the legislative session starts, we usually determine our legislative priorities, and some of it we already mentioned, right? Like pretrial fairness, bail reform, clean slate, other things. If you're interested, please connect with us. We can send out announcements. The other thing that we can do is that we can do what we call like smaller trainings. So let's say if you have an organization, sister, didn't get your name, but, or anyone else. If you want to partner, we can do these smaller like advocacy trainings so that we give you some of the tools to empower you and your team to then be advocates. Same thing, anyone here, and vice versa. We want you to know it's a two-way street. We learn from all of you, and there's suggestions you bring to us that then helps to shape some of our legislative priorities. And so the more lawmakers can hear, 10 minutes, thank you. The more lawmakers can hear from all of us, from your organizations as individuals, and hold people's feet, because it's really wonderful to hear encouraging statements at conferences. We all get kind of pumped up and energized. But the reality is that sometimes people say things, but when you then try to talk to them, like, what are you guys actually doing? How is it being implemented? The hard work, right? That's where we need to hold people accountable. And I can also share you, passing laws is difficult. But sometimes we pass the law. The challenge is that then it's not implemented. And then we're fighting to the hill. But then again, you see other things that pass and automatically there's funding, there's resources. So we have to ensure that when we pass certain laws, two, that it's implemented. And we ask people for outcomes and results. Look at the Hawai'i youth system, the decarceration efforts. They're proving that it can be done, right? And how can we tap into that knowledge? And that really is tied into the community because it takes all of us to increase change.
One last thing, if I may. We've gone through this day, and we're getting towards the end of the day, and I have yet to hear anyone mention for-profit prisons and the absolute injustice of the idea of a for-profit prison. It is in their interest to keep people incarcerated, and I think they need to be abolished. That should be number one on the agenda, because that is a barrier. From all other barriers, that one, that's like the bearing wall of all barriers is that, and we need to start.
So there have been some bills over the years, and the idea was to then work on specifically decarceration, bring people home and close it. And I just want to make a challenge. I think Dr. Omida, who I love dearly, all he said, but there's still this myth to this idea that when you incarcerate out of state that it's much cheaper. But that doesn't include all these other costs, transport, medical. There's a contract per person per bed, which is so offensive the thought anyway. But when you add on all these other costs, it is not so much cheaper, not to mention just the trauma, right, of separating. And we know that the more connection people have with their family visitation, there's a greater likelihood that they will not re-enter the system. So again, by exporting people, the other number we didn't show, I couldn't even show you a slide, that Native Hawaiians are already disproportionately represented, but they're even more likely than even other groups at a higher rate to be exported to private prisons. And so there is a movement, again, it's kind of larger to stop private prisons and abolish it. I can't share with you, I didn't show a slide. We used to export about 1,600, almost close to 1,800 people. We brought it down. And at one time,
all to 2,000 at some point.
okay, so even higher than that. I have to go back in my notes.
And now
2,000.
1,200.
And we had women. But when the New York Times got the story that the women were being sexually abused in Kentucky, all of a sudden the governor, everybody else found a way to bring back all the women, which was the support of, at the time, Warden Patterson and others. But it was also the collective will of the community. So when there's a will, there's a way. And we can bring everybody back home. And I have to say this repeatedly. We can bring everybody back home without building new jails and prisons. Because some people have gone into the community and said, no, we need to build a bigger jail and prison so we can bring our people home. Well, so you're just locking them up there and locking them up here? No, we can decarcerate, bring people home, and have these alternative Pool Honua community drop-in centers, Delancey Street employment training models, all the programs here, that if you got all the funding, imagine what you could do each of your programs if you got $250 a day per person in your program. What could we do? And this is where it comes with reimagination.
I promise this is my last, I'm gonna shut up.
Sorry.
Sending Hawaiians to Arizona is human trafficking. That's the bottom line.
Said that this seems like maybe the path of least resistance might be clemency. Has your organization reached out to our current governor and gotten his temperature on that? Is there an active campaign
Good question.
or is there something any of us here in this room could do?
We're gonna roll out some other stages of the clemency, which is getting people to write letters, calls, postcards to the governor to embrace clemency. But we can tell you that it's actually started. We have reached out. There was a resolution passed this session. We want to sort of take a temperature check by starting with a smaller group of individuals who the governor can give this clemency, which is people who are convicted of cannabis offenses. And so we actually have a meeting with the governor's policy advisors and the attorney general next month. So stay tuned, we have more work to do, but we want to start proof of concept that this can work. The governor of Oregon, Kate Brown, who now is former, she pardoned like over 20,000 people. So it is possible and it is a tool, and you can help us to make that happen.
Sorry to quickly interrupt. For those of you who asked about ways to support our work, please feel free to visit our website and enter your email in it, or follow us on social media. We have Facebook, Instagram. We don't use Twitter that much anymore, but we also have Twitter at ACLU of Hawaii. Feel free to also come up to me or Carrie Ann. We can give you our business card and contact information. But please be sure to keep in contact before legislative sessions so that you're ready and prepared for when it comes around and when these laws and bills are up for debate. So yeah, Mahalo.
And I forgot.
Do all that. I want to thank Kylie and Sherry-Ann for doing the presentation today. My name is Barbara Franklin. I'm on the board of ACLU for Hawaii. I'm the vice president. And I came today and I'm so impressed with your presentation. I really am. And I want to remind everybody, register to vote, participate in legislation by writing letters, learn how to do that, learn how to access the state's website, to comment on bills and things like that, and follow us on social media, and you know, do that sort of thing. I really want to thank everyone, and especially our staff at ACLU of Hawaii. And Scott, why don't you stand up?
So I'll stand up, and
I am having some mobility
Introduce
challenges
yourself.
today with an ankle, so I'll do this from here. So I'm the executive director of the ACLU of Hawaii, and now you can see, because you've heard it today, you've seen it today, that our approach to these issues is really carefully honed. And we know what works, we know what it costs, and we know what the impact would be if we can successfully persuade public officials and other decision makers about this approach, and we can bring all of your voices into this conversation. And I just want to publicly thank, our two key staff people here for the presentation that they did today. I think it was not only informative, but you can see the passion that our team brings to this approach.
Can we clone them? They're amazing.
We are absolutely committed to this work, and these are two of our key people on these issues. I would invite all of you, if you're not already on them, so we have sort of a little bribe going on. If you're not signed up to be on what we call our VAN list, or volunteer network, if you sign up, we'll get you a t-shirt, we'll get you one of these Smart Justice t-shirts. Prisons, people, not prisons. And if you don't want it, that's fine too. But we particularly need your assistance when we're in front of the legislature and we need people to testify or people to write to the governor or other decision makers about these key issues. So please stop by and do that if you haven't already. Thank you.